Hello, everyone. Welcome to another rising sign horoscope. It's Dr. Claire Moon of Aligning Light Astrology, and today we're going to be talking all about Venus. So, Venus's time in Pisces, Aries, and then Pisces again, and then Aries again. And what this ends up being in kind of a sideways way is a look at the astrology weather of the first half of 2025, because this story is one of the big ones for the first part of the year. So, I'm going to do an intro. It's going to go through the nuts and bolts of what Venus will be encountering in the next several months. But before I do that, let's talk about how best to use this information. So, everybody's astrology is a little bit different. So, that's one of the first things to note. So, you're going to want to get your own rising sign at the very least, I think, to best use this information. Once you get your rising sign and you know what that is, then you can more specifically place the houses and which life topics are going to be affected by whatever's going on in Pisces and Aries. So then that I'll help you do that today. But also, if you want to pull up your own horoscope or your own horoscope, your own birth chart, that would be a good thing to do at this time. And then understanding that there are other added layers of timing. So, of course, there's the birth chart, the root of the whole thing. And then we have transits happening around that root. And then we also have things like annual profections, um, decennials, planetary decades. There's all these several different timing techniques that help us to say what things are louder or quieter from birthday to birthday. And it's not always going to be loud for everyone. So, for instance, if some of this is over your head, that's okay. But if you're not in a quote Venus year, if you know what that means, you know. If you're not, then this stuff might not be the front story, the front headline of your year. It's very possible that this will be impactful or important, but it might not be the most important thing. And so, if there are any, big worries or concerns, if Venus is not a Time Lord for you in any kind of way, or in any kind of important way, you can dial your threat assessment down just based on that. Versus if you're someone like me, where in some respects, I'm in 2025 going to have Venus as one of my time lords, this might be affecting me a little bit more loudly. So I'm going to pay attention to it. And I'm probably going to re listen to this afterwards and see what I say. uh, so that's thing one, is just know that this is going to hit everyone differently. And so there's a lot of nuance that I'm not going to be covering that's really personal to you. And if you want to know more about that, that's where you go get a professional astrologer reading. I am but one of many professionals that can help you with that. Other things, uh, stay curious about stuff. We can be concerned about things. We can also go into it knowing, all right, there could be neat stuff, cool stuff, less cool stuff that comes out of, or is that a reflection of this weather that's coming? And we can choose to be curious about that. We can say, all right, let's see what it's going to be like. I'm very excited to know. Versus coming up with all the worst versions, which our brains definitely love to do. It's very natural, as just to detect threats to avoid them. It makes sense that our brains want to go toward the more negative possibilities. Doesn't have to be that. So try to challenge yourself if you're kind of going down that road mentally, to challenge yourself to find some constructive ways that some of the themes I'm going to bring up in a minute, how that could come out for you. One other really important thing to consider in terms of how this could individually affect people, and one thing to consider as we're figuring out how to use this information today, is to know if you personally have a Venus retrograde in your birth chart, a lot of what I say today in terms of challenge, it might not be as challenging for you. You might find this period of Venus retrograde between March 1st and April 12th to be a really fruitful time for topics of romance, relationship, beauty, fun, pleasure, justice, values, all these Venus things I'm about to talk about for a long time. They might go just fine for you during this time if you have a Venus retrograde in your own birth chart, because it's like the skies are aligning with what you came in with. And so it's like things are jiving with you maybe more than usual. So I want you to focus, if you have that in your birth chart, focus more today on more of the constructive, positive manifestations possibilities that I'm going to be discussing. Um, yeah. Venus retrograde babies. Comment concluded. Okay. So last thing, I'm going to riff on each of the rising signs, give some potentials, and what I want that to do for the rising sign portion of this today is to just inspire you, give you some things to consider to bounce off of in terms of what it might be in your own life, which could come out in a different way than what I'm talking about today. The themes give us, the archetypes give us a general set of things that could happen. Like, let's say the theme or the archetype is relationship, Venus. We can see relationships in so many ways. We can see relationships in romantic terms. We can see relationships between fungi and trees in a forest. We can see the relationship between a molecule and a receptor. So, relationship is one huge umbrella. And then, based on your own birth chart, your own personal things, it's going to come out for you in a really unique way, right? So, then my last point, best way to use this information is that you got to be paying attention to your own life. It does take some amount of introspection, being aware of what's going on in yourself, a little outside of yourself at least. There's got to be some awareness of that in order to try to match up what's happening in the sky as above, so below as above. So, um, we're going to be talking about the above, but then it's up to each of us as individuals to be very in touch with the so below as well. So, with that, that's how best to use this information today. If you do get help from this video, hit like, hit subscribe. Thanks for listening to the ads and dealing with those interruptions. I appreciate it. Yeah, hit like, hit subscribe. All those things. I have a newsletter that you can sign up for if you want to keep up with what I'm doing. If you enjoy how I present, you can keep up with this once a month. I send stuff into your inbox. It tells you discount codes. It tells you what I've been up to for the month, what I'm going to be up to. All kind of a one-stop shop. If I have horoscopes, that's where I put those as well. So you can sign up for that on my website, www.aligninglightastrology.com. And that's also where you can book if you like how I'm talking about things today and you would like to talk with me about your own chart. You can do that by booking on my website, www.aligninglightastrology.com. All right, let's get into it. Let's bring up the wheel. So, the first things first, I'm going to talk a little bit about Venus and Pisces and Venus and Aries. They are two different Venuses for sure. Right now, the Venus we have, Venus and Pisces, also evening star Venus. This is like peak Venus time. Venus is quote unquote exalted in Pisces, which means that they're very supported and able to do all of their Venusian things, including relationship, love, beauty, art, romance. Venus is fun. Venus is delights and pleasures. They're also values and justice. So, what do we value? And that can be in the physical world. It can also be abstract things like kindness or whatever. So, what do you value? And Venus and Pisces, they have like this very Jupiterian wide vision of what is possible in terms of art, beauty, relationship, justice, fairness, equity. Venus is about it here. Now, when they get into Aries, Venus is still all about those things. Venus is still about romance, beauty, values, fairness, but they are not nearly as supported. And I would say they're pretty under supported in Aries to do those things, to do harmony, to cultivate harmony. And a lot of that has to do with the pacing. In a water sign, in a nocturnal sign, Venus has a pacing that they agree with when, say, you're trying to build a relationship, build a community, have real harmony. It takes consistent, sustained effort over time. It does not happen quickly. Um, that's a problem when Venus is in Aries. Things go so quickly that it's hard to make those really firm, lasting connections. So all to say, Venus can still Venus, but they're going to have a harder time in Aries, and they're also going to find different ways to do it. So if Venus is in charge of friendship and they're on a battlefield, they're going to try to make friends on a battlefield. If they are doing art, they're going to be doing art in a very fast, physical, more extemporaneous way just kind of off the cuff than they would. Well, maybe they would do that in Pisces too, but much slower. Um, Venus in Aries, it's going to be harder for them to, you know, have easeful justice, easeful fairness. And a lot of times we see Venus having to fight for what is right, fight for what they value, or fight for what they, what is, fighting for what's fair or just. And in myth, if we look at the myth of, and I should, of course, link it below, the astrology podcast, they talked to Demetra George about Inanna, this goddess, this war goddess, this love goddess from Mesopotamia. It's not just about love, beauty, puppies, kittens, and yum-yums. It is also about fighting when there has been injustice or a lack of fairness. And we're maybe going to be faced with some of that, depending on who you are, what's in your chart, what's going on in your context. It's not going to be like that for all of us, but some of us are going to have to run into maybe a challenge to what we value, or having to really step up, advocate, be assertive about what is valued. Sometimes I see Venus and Aries as being really strong style. So, maybe Venus in Pisces is the classic, whatever you find in whatever culture to be like the classic, beauty or whatever that is. In Aries, it is not that. It is the outsider beauty. It is the not mainstream type of beauty. It's much more raw and honest, and not an idealized version necessarily. But I also see just strong style. So like, God, what was her name? Prue on the Great British Baking Show, that elderly woman that had like I said, I don't know their gender, but they had like this super intense jewelry. And I believe they have a Venus in Aries. I'm pretty sure that's because they were one of my Aries and Venus examples at some point. And it was, very consistent actually. Like again and again and again, she would come up with that kind of jewelry. So yeah, really strong and expressive. All right, so let's look at what Venus is going to be doing for the next few months here. Now, I'm going to list these below the video, so you don't have to write these down. You can just copy paste these dates from the info below. But Venus is going to enter their pre-retrograde time on the 28th of January. So this is where really I'm going to say the green flag starts. Venus retrograde stories are going to start to unfold well before the retrograde happens, starting on March 1st. So starting on January 28th, start looking alive, look around you. Notice what's going on in your life and your relationships and your Venus things, which we again will talk about very shortly. So pre-retrograde starts on the 28th of January. On the 4th of February, Venus enters Aries. And then, I guess, let me show you that. There's that. And then she's in Aries. And that is going to be until March 27th, at which point Venus will go back into Pisces until April 30th of 2025. Now, they go retrograde on March 1st. So all of February, Venus is moving forward. They're in Aries. They're doing their thing. Most of February, all of February. And then March 1st, we get Venus stationing retrograde in Aries. So effectively, the whole month of February is really the lead up. So watch, all of February, what is going on with the house topics of Aries and Pisces in your own chart. Then on the 1st of March, Venus is going to station retrograde. They are going to re-enter Pisces at the end of March on the 27th. They're going to be stationing direct in Pisces on April 12th. And then they're going to be finally moving back into Aries on the 30th of April. And they're going to be in there until June. Let me just check that really quick. Yeah, June 5th. is when Venus gets out of Aries. And so, again, like it is really the first entire half of 2025 that Venus is hanging out in a very small part of the sky, really showing us in their Venusian way how they would like to see us run these areas of our lives. So we're going to have a long time. That's the good news and the bad news. We're going to have a long time to sort through all of this, but we're also going to have a long time to sort through all of this. So that's my general feels about it. Those are the big dates to watch for. Let's go through it a little bit more slowly, and then I'm also going to add more dates. So let's go back here to basically now. Let's start talking about this planet that has to do with relationship, connection, values, justice, beauty, art. What happens when they meet Saturn? I mean, it's happening right now. And this is a three-parter. So being Venus is moving back and forth between these areas, they're going to meet Saturn three times. They're going to meet Neptune three times, Rahu three times. All of this is going to be this three-part story. And this actually starts before the 28th of January. This starts really right now. So Venus is really like in an adherence with Saturn now, which is going to perfect on the 18th of January. So here's some stuff that's also written below. You don't have to write this down if you don't want to. You can copy paste. The second Venus Saturn hit, and Venus will be retrograde at this time, is going to be April 7th of 2025. And then the final Venus Saturn conjunction is going to be on April 24th of 2025. So let's take a look at that story. And Saturn is a challenging planet, but it is also a planet of commitment and what endures. And so we've got Venus and Saturn here together on January 18th. The next one, which is going to be at the end of Pisces, that's going to be on April 7th. And then we can see the final one at 27 degrees of Pisces on April 24th. And then Venus is going to move on by April 30th. They'll be out of Pisces. They'll be in Aries. So this is a three-part conversation that really begins now as I'm recording this, and I'm going to be posting this week. So it has begun. This conversation between Venus and Saturn has begun already. So when it comes to relationships, which ones are we committed to? Which ones are we going to put our effort into for a longer term? Who are we committed to and why? Pisces can be a really devotional place, especially the last 10 degrees where Neptune is being, Neptune. So make sure you're careful about who you're devoting yourself to. Make sure you're both on the same page, over communicating. Expectations can be all over the map in here. So making sure everyone is on the same page with what is being expected if we are to commit or do a long-term thing. That is a good plan of action, I think, here. And maybe you're good on all that. You don't need to make any changes. And maybe this is about your existing commitments and looking at all of those a second time, giving those a once over, insofar as you go to the physician every 2 years to get a checkup, you go to your therapist every once in a while to have a conversation. It's a natural kind of refining process whenever a planet is retrograding and doing a thing several times, going over the same place several times. There's like a polishing, refining that can happen here with existing relationships. If you are starting any new relationships in the first half of the year, there could be like the sense of doing things differently. Maybe that polishing and refining insofar as this time I'm going to do things a little differently, that could all be coming up in January. And then this whole thing. So pay attention now, journal, write it down, and revisit it in April. So April, what was it? April 7th and April 24th. These things are going to come back around again. So start thinking about now, in relationship, art projects, community, harmony, where you want there to be harmony. what are the challenges to that? What are the limitations to that? Healthy boundaries around relationships. That's another Saturn Venus thing. Commitments. What do we want to endure or not? Saturn can be long-standing challenges. So long-standing challenges in relationship, art, beauty, love, justice. What are the long-standing challenges? How are we navigating it? And knowing that whatever's going on in January is probably going to be a longer story because it's going to come back around again in April. So get snacks, strap in. It's going to be a longer story, probably. So we talked about Venus and Saturn. Then we have Venus meeting Neptune and Rahu. And both of these planets I consider agents of confusion. And the first of these, this really starts the beginning of February. So, first time is the first day of February. The second time Venus is going to be with Rahu and Neptune is it's like the very end of March into April. So, like the 27th of March into April 1st. And then the last time Venus is conjoining Neptune and Rahu, that's going to be the end of April into May. So April 23rd, they meet the North Node, and on May 2nd, they meet Neptune. So let's take a look at some of these. So on the 1st of February, Venus is meeting Neptune. Rahu is right here. And again, both agents of confusion. They can make things very extra, extra Pisces. What does too much Pisces look like? All right, so in contrast, we can see that Virgo is like attention to detail, and Pisces is knowing when to zoom out, what to let go of, what to discern, okay, of all of these details, which ones are the most important and which ones to pay attention to. So that kind of play, and complementary nature between Pisces and Virgo. So if we know Virgo is attention to detail, too much Pisces is like no attention to detail at all. So in February, March, April, as any of these, I guess more February, April, double checking stuff, over communicating, crossing our T's, dotting our I's, doing all the extra due diligence that might, for whatever reason, go unchecked. Too much Pisces looks like too much fantasy, too much unrealism. Now Saturn is here, so Saturn's going to be like shaking their fist, being like, "Yeah, but realism." They're going to be the realism police in here. But especially Venus, when they're with Neptune, we're going to have all kinds of visions and ideas about what the best version of stuff could look like. Write those down in your journal. Like, we need those good visions to guide us and inspire us, but then come back to earth and be like, what is actually going on right now? What is actually here? Here's the potential. Here's what it could be. Here's the couldinness of it. But eh, you know, we got to make sure that we're not stepping too far out of reality during these times, February and April. Um, Too much Pisces, too much passivity, Hakuna Matata, and not doing enough actual day-to-day drudgery process, the mundane, tedious things that we need to do to keep up with the dreams, that we're striving after. So yeah, we're gonna be on extra the first half of the year. Whenever this Pisces stuff is activated, we kind of got to be extra on top of making sure that we're not forgetting to be Virgoan. We need to hold on to the Virgo at that time. I think that'll be a nice counterbalance. So I guess last thing to show then, the last time that Venus is with Neptune, it's going to be in Aries. So that's going to be a little different than what they have experienced before with Neptune. The fantasies and what we are drawn toward or inspired by might really shift into something different. What we find sexy might change a little bit. What we might desire or feel pulled toward might change a bit. And we might notice that at the very end of April into May, and then more in May. But then at least we can say, as May then progresses, whatever delightful whimsy that has been had might start to dissipate. The fog is going to start to burn off. Venus, at least. Maybe not Saturn, but Venus. Uh, any kind of beer goggles are going to increasingly be removed as Venus gets away from Neptune, and we're going to get a clear vision of things. And, you know, it's hard to know what is going to be skillful to do around May. And I think I'm going to wait before I give any comments on how to handle Venus in Aries versus Venus in Taurus. But the nice thing to know about Venus moving into Taurus, and that happens in June, is that Venus, who has been going through the ringer for a while, they are going to be finally getting some respite, some help, some refuge, some regrouping. And so the second part of 2025, we can start off on a much stronger foot with all of those Venus topics. So the polishing and refinement that happens with our relationships in the first half of the year, I think we're going to have a nice landing pad when we get to June. So hang in there, everyone. And that also goes for your art projects. You know, art projects might be a journey. uh, Justice, striving for that might be a journey, but I'm really excited to see what June holds for us when Venus finally gets in their own domicile again. So let me see if there's anything else. I think there's only one other point I want to make, and now this is specifically about Venus when they are retrograde. So what happens when we apply this rule of Rees or the Re-ness of the retrograde, or apply, the idea of things not going well, things being less effective when planet is retrograde, things being delayed, or, things just being an illusion that never really pans out. That can be a thing. So, what is it when that's Venus? So, looking at this time between March 1st and April 12th. So, all those dates, I think it's the most potent little chunk here is March 1st to April 12th, when Venus is spending part of the time in Aries retrograde, part of the time in Pisces retrograde. They're going to be doing things differently in relationships, doing relationships differently, examining values, bringing life more into alignment with what is valued. Maybe they're going to be doing art in a new way, doing fun, joy, pleasure in a new way. Returning to topics of the past when it comes to relationships. So I know with the Mars retrograde on the astrology podcast, Chris mentions the deuterang, or maybe that was an ostentopicism. Venus, there can be some of that quality of past person coming back, and that can be a friend too. I've noticed a lot of Venus retrogrades. I have friends who I haven't seen in a long time and we catch up, and or it's someone I've had a rain check with and we actually catch back up again. So that can actually be a fun thing about Venus retrogrades. Finding things from the past you used to enjoy, or coming back to things you used to enjoy, coming back to past artistic mediums that maybe you haven't done in a while. All of that can be retrograde time. Also, restructuring relationships, existing ones. They don't all have to get separated and totally be destroyed by catastrophe during a Venus retrograde. It can be a time to really work through challenges, revisit old challenges in a way that is constructive. I would also like to bring up that there are plenty of couples who get married on a Venus retrograde and they do fine, but then it's like the clock of that relationship is on that kind of Venusian clock. So it's not that if you meet someone, like let's say a cool new person comes into your life in the first half of 2025. I mean, even just March and half of April, 6 weeks is a long time. Someone could easily come in, and if that happens, it doesn't mean that it's doomed and that you shouldn't date them or anything like that. I'm actually like, if I have anything that I'm like about that, it's like Venus and Pluto stuff, or Venus and Mars things. Like, I'm gonna watch out for some of those. But Venus retrograde, at worst, just keep it open-ended. Keep things open-ended, light, loose, until things go direct, until Venus gets away from Neptune, that could be the better kind of thing is just taking your time with it, especially when Venus is in Aries. If anything is being rushed or going really quick, that is your sign in 2025 to like pump the brakes, especially if Neptune is around Venus. We can see that things could be illusions, things could be fantasy, and we need to give things time to see how that actually fleshes out. Is this person actually consistent? Is this person actually who they say they are? Not to make anyone, I want to project my own, like, I don't know, concerns onto anyone or my own kind of paranoias that I personally do have about people onto anyone. But, Venus retrograde, meet someone new, take your time with it. Venus in Aries, meet someone new, take your time with it. Uh, so reversals, changes to any of these things, that is a possibility. Relationships, art projects, certain types of preferences, could be a re-examining of those things and deciding differently. And then we can also see, you know, inconsistency with a retrograde planet. So inconsistency in connections, relationship, inconsistency with beauty, pleasure, fun. So if there are interruptions, a difficulty in making some of these things happen between March 1st and April 12th, yeah, if the date night goes just okay, hang in there. So with inconsistencies, just knowing that you might not be imagining it. It might be really happening. If you are trying to move toward Venusian things and there's challenges, hang in there until April. Hang in there even more until after May 14th, because then a lot of these stories of change, revisiting the past, doing things differently with Venus, a lot of that stuff is going to be fleshed out and taken care of, wrapped up by middle of May. All right, cool. So before I go into rising sign horoscopes, I did the little divination thing with the Roshi Joan Halifax deck, and I pulled cards from the fire and the water chunks to give us some advice about what we should be focusing on when we have Venus and Pisces in a water sign versus Venus and Aries in a fire sign. So I'm going to do water first, and it's a little long, so bear with me. It's time stamped if you want to move ahead. I'm not going to do like the whole like quiet meditation moment right now. I'm just going to read this. So this was the advice that I got from the deck. For Venus and Pisces, it says, offering love and compassion, settling your body, heart, and mind. Reflect deeply on these phrases. I guess I don't need the wheel for this. May suffering arising from hatred and fear be remedied. May those in the grip of insecurity be released to the safety of understanding. May those lost in confusion find relief in wisdom. May the wounds on the earth be healed through our right action. May we bring an end to war, consumerism, economic disparity, racism, and sexual violence. May those in refugee camps and prisons find their way home. May those without shelter find safe harbor in community. May those suffering from grief and the ravages of sickness find peace. May those who care for the sick find support as they serve others. May those who have died be liberated from confusion. May all awaken and awaken others. So as Venus is moving through Pisces, what Jupiter helps Venus do there, because it's Jupiter's place, is helping us imagine the ideal version of what relationship could look like, of what community could look like. And I love that what came up with this was an invocation of all of these wishes for the end of suffering, basically. So I thought that's really neat. And then for Aries, for the fire sign, it says cultivating compassion with grace. And then it gives us an acronym, a GRACE acronym. So it says this is something that we can use when Venus is in Aries. Gather, G, gather your attention on an inhalation. On exhalation, drop into your body. R, recall your intention to end your own suffering and the suffering of others. Attune first to yourself, your body, heart, and mind. Next, attune to another, body, heart, and mind. Consider what will serve by pausing and reflecting. And finally, engage now from a base of equanimity and care, and end the interaction by acknowledging internally or interpersonally what has transpired. I'm going to summarize this. So, gathering your attention in your breath and your body, recalling your attention, recalling your intention to end suffering of yourself and others, attuning to yourself, attuning to the other, considering what will serve you by pausing and reflecting, or what will serve by pausing and reflecting, engaging from a place of balance and care, and ending the interaction by acknowledging internally or interpersonally what has happened. Yeah, that'd be good. Especially Aries is so fast, considering what will serve by pausing and reflecting is usually a pretty good call for Aries. And I have an Aries and Jupiter in my third house of speech. And so this comes up for me mostly in my communication, like every day, all the time. Um, the speed with which it can happen. And it's not usually good that I do that speed. It's really handy when I need to use it. Um, I kind of wonder if I actually would have been okay. I never thought I would be good at emergency medicine, but maybe I would have. I don't know. But the speed is really helpful in some cases, in other cases it's not, right? Aries. Okay. So that was the last thing I wanted to share in terms of a general overview, talking about Pisces, talking about Aries. And let's get into the rising sign horoscopes, my friends. So you can jump ahead to your rising sign horoscope or stop at one of a loved one, but please enjoy. Hello, Aries rising. All of this Venus activity is going to be happening for you across your first and 12th houses. And if we know that Venus has to do with fun, desires, joys, preferences, if we know that Venus has to do with values, what we value, ethics, and also, of course, relationships, then we can look for those themes specifically related to the first house of self. So, within relationships, where does the self fit into that? Within your values, what values do you have that you really want to embody? In the first house, this can also be appearance, Venus being adornments, Venus being whatever makes us feel beautiful. While Venus is in your first house in Aries, which is more in February, you might really be focusing on, whoops, you might really be focusing on bringing beauty, romance, however it comes, into your general sphere. So be watching out for Venus's themes moving across your first house and more relevant to January, also April. Venus is going to be in Pisces. And so here, this is a place of mental health, emotional health, spiritual health, any related practices to upkeeping or helping with our mental health, emotional health, spiritual health. The 12th house can have to do with long-term or long-standing challenges, also long-standing medical challenges. It is a place of general suffering, whether it is our own or witnessing other people's. And the 12th house is the management of that suffering. I think a lot of the ways people look at the 12th house these days is in the terms of inner work, quote unquote shadow work. the subconscious. Um, yeah, inner work, spiritual health. That's kind of lumped together for me. So absolutely. In the 12th house, we go away from the hustle and bustle of the 6th house. We move away from that. The opposite of that is the 12th house, where we have solitude, isolation, even. If you choose it, if you have agency about it, the 12th house can be solitude. Many times in the 12th house, there is themes of exile, themes of otheredness, themes of marginalization, a lot of difficult things in the 12th, but also spiritual things. Also, hidden things. It is a place from the perspective of the rising sign, not easy to see into the 12th, or the 2nd, or the 6th, or the 8th. But the 12th, especially, is tough and hidden and mysterious. So, that's where some of the subconscious stuff can come in. Again, just sometimes spending time outside of the hustle bustle, slowing down, getting in touch with your inner self, which sometimes, well, I think most of the time can only be done when we are slowed down, when there's some silence, some stillness. That's how we get in there. And there are some things that you cannot see from the 12th. There are some things you cannot see unless you're in the 12th. You can only see it from in there. And so Venus is going to be exploring, helping us explore values, maybe around spiritual health, emotional health, mental health. Maybe what we enjoy about the navigation of suffering. Maybe if I am going to have to go into my inner world and be spiritual, at least I'm going to have some nice incense. It's going to smell good in here. And hopefully I have a nice pillow or something. So don't be afraid to do what is luxurious or comforting or soothing around your mental health, emotional health, spiritual health practices while Venus is in Pisces. Um, when Venus is retrograde, we know that retrograde speaks to doing things differently, also going back to things that we've been doing in the past, maybe running into people, places, things from the past. Venus retrograde, any retrograde, can be inconsistencies or challenges, obstacles, delays. So letting whatever these Venusian processes are about the self, the outer self, the inner self, the mind, body, spirit, the inner world, whatever the Venusian polishing, refining that's going on in here, however this is ending up roundabout, at least relating to relationships for you, because of course you're always one half of a relationship. Whatever these processes are, just like be patient with it. Let yourself experiment. Let yourself go back and forth. Let yourself keep things open-ended. Uh, maybe through that retrograde period between March 1st and April 12th. So yeah, being soft with yourself. I know Saturn's going to be around and they usually want to make rules or structures or outer edges of things. Um, they might have to exercise some patience while Venus is figuring out what are my preferences? What would I like my wardrobe to be? Do I really want bangs? What kind of spiritual activities might suit me? Um, what kind of things might help me ease into some of the inner work that I might have resistance to? And we all do. So, yeah, I'm really looking forward to this time. Venus is such a help in so many ways. Um, and I hope it's an okay time for you. Let me see if I'm missing anything in my notes. Um, oh, and remembering what you like about yourself. So, especially when Venus is in your first house, when Venus is in Aries, remembering what you really like about yourself, remembering what you value about yourself, what's cute. Hopefully, Venus will help you do that while they're in Aries. And then finally, if you have any large animals, any animals from very far away places, um, especially any riding animals, sometimes that's 12th house, sometimes it's 6th. but sometimes it's 12th. And Mercury is going to be around here too, so you never know. Maybe that'll get brought in somehow. If animals are relevant to your life, Venus moving through the 12th house, Venus in Pisces, might be a nice time to connect with animals, shower them with gifts, adorn them, whatever that means, putting a little jacket on, Scruff McGruff or whoever. Um, it might be a nice time to connect with animals. That's the last thing. That's all that I have. So, good luck, Aries Rising. I hope everything goes well. I hope you can find some nice things about Venus being in these places. So, Taurus Rising. This is going to be happening across your 12th and 11th houses. The 11th house, friends, groups, hopes, dreams, aspirations. The 12th house, I have a very long list, but the big buckets of things I have for the 12th include suffering and its navigation, hidden things, mysterious things, and spirituality, which kind of is the navigation of suffering in a lot of ways. So, spiritual health, mental health, emotional health practices in the 12th house, which is going to be a focus of Venus's transit through. And it can also be about animals, especially large animals, riding animals, or animals from faraway places. When Venus is in Aries, it might be a good time to reconnect, especially in terms of what are the Venusian preferences around these topics, around friends, groups. What do you prefer when you're hanging out with friends? What kind of friends do you prefer? What things do you like to do together? Venus helps remind us and realign us with what we value, who we value, what we value about who, and even yourself in friendship. Also, your hopes, dreams, and aspirations. Venus can help point you toward what you really desire to do, what might really fill your heart full of joy to do. It can be a small aspiration, a big aspiration, a long term one with Saturn there. It very well could be. But Venus can really point us to, hey, what do I value? What do I really feel called to spend my time on and my energy? And we can be led by those values a little easier when Venus is around. Venus is also relationships, romance. It's extra romantic in Pisces. So, doing really luxurious things with friends, that could be a real possibility while Venus is in Pisces in your 11th. And when Venus is in the 12th, bringing that sense of Venusian comfort, comforting the senses into the sphere of spiritual health, emotional health, mental health. As you take care of your inner world, what might make that more comfortable? You know, in your spiritual life, what relationships might be helpful or important? Um, what relationships might support you in taking care of your inner world versus looking at what relationships might be dragging you downward? Those are all good conversations to have with yourself while Venus is going to be in Aries in your 12th house if you're a Taurus rising. So, knowing that Venus, when they are retrograde, this can be doing things differently with friends and groups, with hopes, dreams, aspirations, doing things differently with your mental health, emotional health, spiritual health practices, upkeep, management. Um, trying things, trying things out, experimenting. And knowing that especially between March 1st and April 12th, if you do need to go back to the drawing board, revisit things, relationships, ideas, values, and check in and see if it's all still fitting and working, that's totally okay. Leave things open-ended as much as possible before April 12th. And then after that, Venus can tie up loose ends, figure things out in a final sweep through these places. So, in terms of Venus being relationship, it's not that you shouldn't date your friends. Sometimes that happens, and sometimes it's great and perfect. Um, Venus retrograde, sometimes it's fine, especially if you have it in your birth chart. I don't want it to be like a deal breaker, especially if you're doing relationship differently. if you are trying things out a different way this time around. That actually really fits for Venus retrograde. So don't let that stop you. At the same time, there is that note, especially with Neptune around and Rahu, that there could be some confusion or uncertainty or maybe some delusion or illusion, of course, with Neptune. So just as you're going through relationships, especially romantic ones or really sensitive relationships between now and May of 2025 approximately, just make sure that you're keeping things open-ended, being as flexible as possible, and not trying to set things in stone too much. At the same time, I don't think that these skies are total deal breakers, but Saturn being around, there's just going to be this background question about longevity, sustainability, the reasonability of things. So that actually helps Venus amidst Neptune and Rahu. It helps her to keep things on the level. But overall, just a little dating kind of sub point. And, knowing that Taurus, you are literally Venus, this is extra special because I can say, of course, you are your whole chart, you are your sun, moon, rising, but we can also say that you're Venus. And Venus themselves is going to be doing this whole retrograde dance, trying things out, doing things differently, maybe having some obstacles along the way, but, you know, finding their footing, of course. So again, if you're finding yourself in general just doing things differently with friendship or spiritual life or groups or even just like aspiring toward different things than you versus what you used to, that would all fit for this. So let yourself be very different and open-ended as well this first 2 quarters of 2025. Okay, that is all I have for Taurus rising. Good luck. Gemini rising, all of the Venus activity for you is going to be happening across your 11th and 10th houses. And so Venus being about love, relationships, beauty, art, what is enjoyable, delightful, our preferences. Venus is also our values. They're what we care about in a lot of ways. Venus can point us to all of those things, help us get in touch with all of those things. And especially for you, Gemini rising, this is going to be as it relates to the 10th house of career, life path, and public life, and the 11th house of friends and groups, and your hopes and dreams, your aspirations. So Venus is going to be pointing you toward, hey, what do you really want to do? What do you really aspire toward? That's enjoyable, that's fun for you. What kind of people, what kind of friends and groups would you like to be a part of? What preferences do you have around being with friends or groups? Who do you value? Who values you as a friend? It can really help remind us what we love about certain areas of life. Venus is going to be in the 10th in Pisces at certain points across the next 6 months. And while Venus is in your 10th house in Pisces, they are going to be helping point you to what you value around career, around life path, also legacy. Oftentimes, the 10th house is what people are doing in this life, but also then what they are leaving behind. And so, Venus drawing you back to what you really value in terms of what you do want to leave behind. What kind of relationships might you want to leave behind? Um, what kind of relationships might you want in a career? What do you value in a career? What do you prefer? So, preferences are not chosen. There are things that we can like and dislike, and those are what they are. And it's good to get in touch with them while Venus is around. This is a great time wherever Venus is. So, in your career department, in your friend zone, Venus is gift giving, Venus is fun. So, bringing muffins to work, or maybe someone else does. That would be even better. So, not to upsell it too much, but I'm hoping that Venus will bring some nice things to your career, your life path, to your ideas on legacy. I hope Venus will bring nice things to your friend zone. Now, the last thing I want to mention is that when Venus is actually retrograde between March 1st and April 12th of 2025, Venus is going to be doing things differently, experimenting, trying on different things when it comes to friends, aspirations, career, life paths. Venus retrograde is potentially inconsistencies, difficulties, challenges. So, as you are doing your relating, reconsidering preferences, reconsidering what you value in these areas of life, you might also be running into little hiccups, little bumps in the road, little difficulties when it comes to relating with certain places, people, things. So give it time, especially March and the first half of April, if there are any difficulties with these Venusian things. Let them be open-ended, let them be there, and they will clear up end of April into May. So something else about Venus being in two different houses during this retrograde transit is that they're going to bring together those topics potentially. And so the topics of career, life path, they might be melding with groups and friends, or something about groups and friends, or people who are helping you along in your life in general. There might be some connection that's happening there that might draw these areas of life together in this focus over the first half of 2025. So good luck, Gemini Rising. And we're going to talk to Cancer Risings. Cancer Risings. This is going to be happening in your ninth and 10th houses. So Venus is bringing their themes around relationship, art, beauty, values, justice, preferences into the ninth house of travel. So preferences around travel. We also have a place in the ninth that is about worldview, philosophy, beliefs. So then we can really get into this heady, idealistic and Pisces notion about how good relationship stuff could be under this philosophy. So you might be getting into some philosophical territory if you're Cancer rising about what you might want in love, what you might prefer in love, but like on a really philosophical level. So that'll be really interesting. It might be Venusian themes around higher education or continuing education. It doesn't have to be any institution or a university. Continuing education happens all the time, everywhere, but especially if it's learning about an advanced version of something, that's very much the ninth house. So as you are learning advanced things in the first half of 2025, what about it do you value? And maybe you're brought back to reminding yourself about what it is that you value about that branch of study that you've gotten into so much, or that certain philosophy or spiritual worldview. Venus can speak to our preferences. So again, when it comes to continuing education, how do you want that to go down? How do you want it to feel when you're doing that? It can be about relationships in these places, relationships related to long distance travel, far away people that you have a relationship with. It can be about this time, especially during the retrograde portion between March 1st and April 12th, people from the past coming around, especially people from the past who might be also far away. Um, People from past continuing ed experiences, past university experiences coming back during this time. Um, Anything about relationships that's being reworked on a philosophical level inside of you. That could definitely be what Venus is up to during this time. Venus is also going to be in your 10th house of career and life path if you're a Cancer rising. So, this is all of those things about preferences on the path, preferences in career, and what you value, and are you able to find a path or a career that aligns with what you value? Any of those can be mundane things like I value making my own schedule, or it can be bigger things like I value a company that honors my desire to be honest. So Venus going into the 10th could also have to do with values, relationships around legacy. So often the 10th is what we are doing, all the actions that we're taking in this life. Many times it ends up being a career, but it's also what we end up being, or it also ends up being something we leave behind. So whatever we spend our time doing the most here, that's a lot of what we leave behind. And when Venus is up here, it can really beg that question of, do I value what I'm leaving behind or what I'm about to leave behind? Do I value how this path is going? And again, like what I will leave behind, am I going to be pleased with that? Is that going to be supportive of my relationships or not? Those are Venusian questions as Venus goes through a place. So could get pretty heady up here, pretty philosophical at times. It could also be very mundane. Meeting an old friend from college, meeting an old friend from an old department at work, from old person from earlier on in the path. All of those things when Venus goes retrograde are possible. Let things be open-ended in March and the first half of April. If there's certain plans that want to unfold, you do not have to stop them. However, try not to set things into stone when it comes to some of these ninth house and 10th house topics um, until after mid-April. Then Venus is going to go direct, and there won't be so many reworkings, so many circuitous things that could happen during the retrograde. The ninth house also has to do with publishing and mass communication. So for Cancer risings, especially with like your newsletters, your blogs, whatever you're putting out there on a larger scale that anyone could see, when Venus is retrograde in here between, um, well, not all of March, but more into April when Venus is back into Pisces. Um, if you have a typo, it's okay. It's not the end of the world. If someone misunderstands you, trust yourself that you will be able to navigate that. But just, do your best to understand that there's a retrograde planet in your place of publishing, and there could be snafus, typos, difficulties, revisions required, extra steps required to make things work. And with Saturn up there, it makes me concerned about um, rejection. So just be careful out there with your blogs. Do your best. Uh, that's what I have for you, Cancer Rising. I hope you have a nice time with Venus polishing, refining your relationships in these areas of life, polishing and refining any art projects in these areas of life. All that Venus is doing. I'm hoping it's very constructive for you. I guess, thinking about it too, Cancer Rising, it is kind of cool that Venus is going to be spending a lot of time sending this overcoming trine to your ascendant. That's really nice. I know they're going to be doing a lot of reworking, experimenting, having a time up here, but they're still going to be sprinkling their fairy dust, which is being beamed right down here onto you. So that's very helpful. And even when they're in Aries and they're not doing quite as well, but they're still sending a really potent square down to your first house. So a planet like Venus in a square, it was said to still be a good thing. So I'm hopeful that for especially Cancer risings, hopefully there'll be some nice things for you in this really first half of 2025. But best of luck. All right, Leo rising. Venus is going to be spending a lot of time first half of 2025 in your eighth and ninth houses. And we know that Venus is about relationships, beauty, art, justice, fairness, ethics. Venus is about what we value. What do we prefer? And they are going to be looking at all of those things, especially as it relates to your eighth house of sharing, shared resources, other people's resources. Venus is going to be asking, what do I value in terms of my collaborations? What kind of sharing am I doing with people? And is it aligned with what I value, who I want to be, the kind of relationships I want to be in? Saturn's here, so they're asking, is it sustainable? Is this really a long-term, long game thing that we're doing with other people? Venus is asking if you are being valued appropriately as well. So lots of themes about self-respect, sharing, reciprocity, fairness in that. And there might be some reworkings happening in those areas of sharing and collaboration, especially in March and April of 2025. So, letting those types of exchanges that you have with people, whether it be around money, time, energy, skills, whatever it may be, letting those topics be somewhat open ended, letting them be experimental, trying new things, knowing that if there's some hiccups along the way in March and April, that's all right, just keep going. Um, and when Venus is in your ninth, they might get, a little philosophical, really thinking about worldview. Are my relationships fitting in with worldview? How are my philosophies coming into my relationships? Venus retrograde up here could be a rethinking of philosophy around relationship and how you are doing things with that, or how you're meeting others in relationship. So there might be some really fruitful, profitable type of reworkings of relationship, even on a more conceptual, philosophical level. Venus bringing ideas about preferences into long distance travel, like literally, where would you like to go? What would you like to do while you're there? Would you like to fly in coach or first class? What are your preferences? Well, I guess I would prefer things. It does not mean I can afford them. But preferences as it has to do with long distance travel, continuing education, philosophy, publishing, mass communication. What are your preferences around those things? If you have a blog, how do you prefer to run that? If you are planning on publishing a thing, how is that aligning with your values or your preferences? Um, Venus's relationships. So also this can be a time, first half of the year, really, where relationships in ninth house spaces might be more prominent. Perhaps meeting people over shared views, shared universities, shared long distance places, meeting people on those types of in those types of ways. Um, it could be fun, especially when Mars is in a trine. You know, that could be really fun. So it might be spicy. If there's a challenge to your values, if there's a challenge to how you feel like things should be done, Venus might be dealing with some discomfort and having to assert themselves, especially when they're in Aries. So don't be afraid to do that either. That might be necessary during this time. Venus in the first half of 2025 asserting their values, especially being it's in the place of belief. Maybe you're doing that very vocally. That could be the case if you're a Leo rising, especially when Venus is spending time in Aries this first half of the year. Venus, while they are retrograde, can be doing things differently in these areas of life, trying new things. Venus could be experimenting, going back to the drawing board and reconsidering how they want to run these areas of life. So, with the collaborations, if you are finding that things need to change, if the sharing needs to change, then thinking about how that might be done, really reconsidering that in March and April. Uh, the eighth can also be end of life topics, themes around death, planning for that, estate management and planning. Venus here could be a lot around managing end of life experiences. It would kind of, for Leo risings, this is kind of dark, but it's necessary. Filling out your advanced directives, whatever those are called in your country, in your state. There's usually a form that you fill out and then you give it to your healthcare provider, or a copy of it to your healthcare provider, and it outlines like how you want to go out, medically, spiritually, what kind of medical care do you want in the end, or not? What kind of spiritual services might you like in the end or not? All of that is really important. And it also can really help to alleviate the guilt of other people in your life, of having to make difficult decisions, if the horrible circumstance would happen that would be relevant. Advanced directives. That's the magic word. That might be a really cool sympathetic magic thing to do with Venus and Saturn in your eighth house in the first half of 2025. I wasn't expecting this to go there, dear Leo rising, but it did. Uh, yeah, and I should do that too, even though I'm not Leo rising, um, because mine are outdated. I did them like a decade ago. If that tells you anything about the kind of person I am. I would say, Venus retrograde, especially if you have it in your birth chart, I'm not that worried about you in terms of like collaborating with people during this time. So if people are like wanting to do a project with you in March and April and you see Venus retrograde in your eighth, don't panic. You can totally do the project, but over communicate. Communicate expectations. Make sure that other people's expectations are reasonable and that yours are, and that you're all on the same page. Neptune is around first half of the year as well with all of this. So, it's just kind of a blanket thing for the first half of the year. This could go for everyone, honestly, all of our relationships, but over communicate expectations if there are any. Uh, Ideally, in Pisces, it would be no expectations, only possibilities, but that's hard to do. Um, but it's not a deal breaker. So that's the point. The retrograde is not a deal breaker. But, go with the flow. You might have to circle back around to stuff, or, clean up some messy things at some point. But hopefully by the time we get to the end of April, those things are all ironed out and you're able to move forward with a little more ease and a little less delay obstacle. So I just want to point that out, being it's like a Venus retrograde, which sometimes there can be relational strife, but especially in the eighth house, we want to be extra careful because it can really start to get into sensitive territory around people's exchanges of stuff and things. And that includes time and energy. So, one last thing for Leo risings, while Venus is in your eighth house, they're also going to be refining, polishing, reworking topics around complex finances, debt, taxes. So anything that has to do with more of your complex or complicated financial ventures, stocks, bonds, trading, any kind of charitable types of things, Venus might be reworking those depending on changes to values, or just doing things differently, you know, doing those things with different people. All of that could be reworked during this time when Venus is in Pisces in the first half of 2025. So don't forget to look out for Venus affecting those more mundane types of things. All right, thank you. I think that's all I have for Leo rising, so good luck. All right, Virgo rising. So Venus is going to be spending the first part of 2025, first half, in your seventh houses of the other important committed partners, whether it's romantic partners, business partners, best friends. If the rare, hopefully rare circumstance that someone might have an open adversary, like someone you have a beef with and you both know it, that is also a seventh house person. And so Venus is going to be moving through this area in the first half of 2025, as well as the area that has to do with sharing with all of these people. Uh, their resources, complex finances, taxes, debt, and also death and end of life topics. Venus is going to be moving through all of those things and then putting that lens of value. What do I value around end of life? What do I value around death? The experience of dying. What preferences might I have around those experiences when they happen to my loved ones or to me? And so I had mentioned this with Leo rising. I'm also going to mention this with Virgo rising. Venus and Aries might be a time of considering doing your advanced directives. So, advanced directives, maybe they have different names in different countries or different states. Sometimes I think there's some overlap with like the living. No, it's not the same as a living will. The advanced directives, what they are, is a form. Usually it's an official form that you get from some governmental department, and you hand it in to your physician or healthcare provider, a copy of it to them. And what it is a whole going over of how you want to go out. So, do you want a certain type of medical care at the end of your life or not? How do you want to be taken care of at the end of your life, depending on circumstances? How do you want the funeral services to be carried out with, which spiritual traditions or not? And then getting all of that written down and again, handing that into your healthcare provider or lawyer or trusted adult. Um, the main concern here is, of course, agency, which I think Aries in the eighth can appreciate having agency in these processes. But a nice side effect of doing that type of kind of depressing exercise is that it can save your loved ones from guilt around making those difficult decisions without knowing exactly what you wanted. So that's a nice, I wasn't expecting to go there, but it came up. This might be a nice thing to do with Venus in your eighth house for a while. They're going to be in there all of February, um, into March. So that's what you can do with that. Also thinking about your values around complex finances. If you've got, certain stocks or bonds or however those work. I'm like financially illiterate, so I'm going to leave it up to y'all to understand these things. But, how do your values play into that? Or do they not? That could be a topic that comes up, or just preferences around those processes that could come up during this time. That would be something that you could refine or polish or sort out. Um, any kind of thing about sharing, reciprocity, and fairness coming up during especially March and April. That might be something that you might have to work through either internally, externally, or both in terms of making sure that your relationships and the sharing that goes on with them, whether it's professional, romantic, or otherwise, is, if it's fair, making sure it's sustainable. Saturn is around. Saturn always has this long game in mind, and they're wondering, how is this going to stand the test of time, this relationship, this arrangement. So having, that mind of like, is this doable over the long term? That's really going to serve us in the first half of 2025 as we're making decisions about relationships and what you're sharing with people. So, um, preferences are not chosen. We just have them. And then it's up to us to, assert them, make sure that, see how they can be met. So Venus might be dealing with a lot of that in terms of like how your preferences are honored or not in relationship with the other. For Virgo risings, one nice thing that I'm hoping for Venus being in the eighth and the seventh is that there can be a lot of sharing in the first half of 2025 with others in a way that is fun and enjoyable. So Venus brings fun. She brings pleasure. She brings delight. Venus is in charge of adornments and getting dolled up, basically. So, however you do that, however you kick back, have fun, let your hair down, but like with other people, that is good sympathetic magic for this time. Venus wants us to connect, and she is in a place for Virgo risings, especially that has to do with other people. So I hope that the first half of 2025, that Venus is helping you to enjoy your relationships that you do have, um, that she's really just helping you to remember what you do value, what you do like to do for fun with other people. And, knowing that if you are single, if you meet someone during this time, especially in March and early April, it's not a deal breaker, especially if you have Venus retrograde in your birth chart. I'm not worried about you, but Venus retrograde can be a time of doing things differently in relationship, especially. And if Venus is in your seventh or eighth, that is that could be doing things differently with other people, within relationship, and that could be really healthy, really natural. And so if you find yourself dating in March and April of 2025, Don't let the Venus retrograde scare you. If you are concerned, especially given that Neptune and Rahu are around and they don't make things clear, you can keep things open-ended until April 12th. You can, you know, just kind of do the wait and see maybe thing and be light and fun about it for March and the first half of April. And then after that, Venus is going to get away from Neptune and get even more clarity. So, not a deal breaker. Worst case, you can just move slow until mid April. So, that's what I have to say about relationship stuff for Virgo rising. Last notes about Venus: when they are retrograde, they are doing things differently. When they are retrograde, they like to experiment. There might be reworkings needed in some of these areas of life. So keeping things open-ended in March and April, whether it's, with a relationship with someone or a project that you're doing where you're going to be sharing time or energy together, just making sure that you're going with the flow, being as flexible as possible in March and the first half of April, because there might be some having to rework arrangements or agreements, and that might just be how it goes. So over communicate as best as you can and just do your best. That's what I have for you, Virgo rising. Good luck. All right, for Libra rising, this is going to be happening, all this Venus weather. It's going to be happening across your seventh house of other people, especially important one-on-one people, committed romantic partners, business partners, best friends. If you have a beef with someone and you both know it, an open adversary. Venus is also going to be affecting your place of health, wellness, disease, recovery from disease. Venus is going to be in the place of pets and also labor in the sixth house. Sixth house is also conflict. So, I know there's a lot of red flags probably popping up for any kind of intermediate or above Libra rising astrologer out there. Uh-oh. Do I got to worry about relationship? Not necessarily. Venus can be actually a reminder when they move through a place. Venus can remind us what we love about people, what we love about relationships, what we value. And if we are aligned with our values, if we're living out our values, if our relationships reflect our values, then we might look around with Venus in our seventh and be like, hell yeah, great, cool. Everything's aligned. Nice. Let's have fun. Let's party. Venus is a good time. Venus is adornments, gift giving, pleasure, delight. So by all means, Venus, I almost called you Venus rising, Libra rising, use the first half of the year if you can to have fun with other people if they're down. Now, let's say it's on the other end of the spectrum and things aren't necessarily aligned, or you're in a place, as Venus is in Aries, that it does not fit it doesn't fit. Um, Venus feels like an outsider in Aries a lot of the time. And so if you are up against challenges to your values, people who don't agree with your values, challenges to your ethics and morals, that can absolutely also be what's going on here during the first half of 2025. So if you're running into any kind of incongruency in your values versus what's around you, and there's some discomfort around that, hang in there. That's not going to be the case in the second half of the year. It's going to be better, but there might be some of that. And so having to maybe assert yourself, advocate for yourself a bit extra, especially in February and March when Venus is in Aries. It can be other people who are doing the gift giving, the affirmation, the fun having. So feel free to join them as well. And when Venus is in your sixth, bringing all those same things to the place of health, labor, pets, conflict. In terms of health, you know, how could it be that you could take care of your health and have it be pleasurable, fun, delightful? It's not frivolous, even though Saturn is here and they might say it's frivolous. Venus in the sixth can be like, hey, you know what would be fun? You know what would be yummy? Uh, we can put that energy of desire, of yumminess, of wanting yummy with things that are good for us. And so that would be a really great way to put things together when Venus is in Pisces, which is more now as I record this in January, and then again more in April. Our values, how does our management of the day-to-day, the grind, chores, how, you know, is our daily maintenance of ourselves, is that all aligned with our values? This is the classic, like, you know, if I believe in fair trade, is my coffee fair trade? If I, you know, am a vegetarian, does my day-to-day lived experience support that? That could be a very sixth house, Venus in the sixth house type of thing. Imagining the best version of it. So, one thing that I didn't mention, which I probably should have, is that Venus with Uranus, you know, maybe this is especially great to say because you're a Venus, you know, if Venus is ruling Libra, you are Venus. As Venus moves through Neptune in the first half of the year, it is going to be a really potent time to imagine, to vision, to dream about what the best version could be of things. And not to like get attached to that version, but to have it as an inspiration for something to work toward. And Saturn might want to be hard on you, you know, highly critical, self-deprecating Saturn. You know, why aren't you doing this or that? Should. But when Venus is in Pisces, we can do these things out of self-love, maybe much easier. So I was recently reading a little meme and it was from Avatar and it was talking about how, you know, if you're struggling with discipline, it could mean that you're lacking something or there's something wrong. But a lot of times, a lacking of discipline is not maybe having compassion for the self or um, loving the self enough to have discipline. So if we can look at our routines, the things that we have to do out of duty, and maybe we're doing it because it aligns with our values and we know that our later self is going to be happy that we did it. Or we're doing it because we love ourselves and we know it's going to make us feel better even this day. You know, how I begrudgingly personally do my movement uh, routines. I really don't want to do them usually ever. But I know if I don't, I'm not going to feel as good later in the day. So, if we can try to use motivation of self love and compassion and understanding behind our motivation for self care in the sixth, I think that would be a really nice way to use Venus in Pisces in your sixth. I know it's kind of hokey sounding for some of us, like that's a little soft, but you know, that's that's how it works, and I don't make the rules. Self love and compassion is difficult, but it works. Uh, I think it's good to note because, especially in the sixth house area of life, I feel like most people are so hard on themselves. You know, how good are you at taking your dog on walkies all the time? How good are you at taking care of yourself and flossing your teeth? How good are you at clocking into the office on time every day? You know, there's a lot of standards and rubrics and rigidity here, and Saturn can just make that even more so. So, all to say, again, I'm happy that Venus is here for a good chunk of the first half of the year because she's going to help to soften some of this stuff that Saturn is really making kind of tough. So, uh, last thing about Venus being retrograde in the seventh and the sixth. So, it's tying these areas together a bit in terms of your day to day chores and other people. So, if you have partners in life, there might be that question of, you know, maybe you need help getting through the list of chores every day, and there's a matter of asking someone for help or making sure that everything's fair, reciprocitous, people are doing their share of the labor. That could be a way that the seventh and the sixth come together. It's a time of reworking, refining, polishing, reconsidering. So if you want to redo, reshuffle around any of these topics of your day to day life, your day to day schedule, how you take care of your pets, how you take care of yourself or other people, the Venus retrograde period, especially in March and early April, is a really nice time to rework all of those things if they need reworking. In case I didn't already say it, Venus in the seventh, especially retrograde, I think can cause a little bit of alarm. And it makes a lot of sense, you know? Venus being retrograde, sometimes struggling a bit with relationship. Um, over communicate in the first half of 2025 with your loved ones, with your important one-on-one people, but also know that Venus retrograde in the seventh, it can be a time of doing things differently in relationship, of, going back to things you used to enjoy doing in relationship. Things coming back from the past don't have to be haunting. Sometimes they're fun and awesome. One time I had a Venus retrograde and I found a Game Boy. I talk about that one a lot because it was awesome. It was really, really fun. So, some things from the past are great. It can be old best friends that you haven't talked to in a long time. But I think my main point I want to drive home here is that if you're a Libra rising, Venus is retrograde in your seventh, you don't have to panic. You can date people. It's like a month and a half that they're going to be retrograde. That's a long time to not date people if you're hankering to date someone. So, what you can do is just know, especially if you're doing things differently in that relationship, if you're doing things differently this time around, that can be so fitting for Venus retrograde. So, it can actually be a really great time to try out a new way of being in relationship or a new way of relating during a retrograde. And then if you're concerned about the stability, which, yeah, there's a lack of stability during a retrograde sometimes, you can hold out, move things slowly, um, take your time, be open ended, be light and aloof about things as much as possible until April 12th. And then Venus is going to go direct. Things will start to clear up the further and further that Venus also gets away from Neptune. So it's not a deal breaker for Venus retrograde in your seventh. There are things that can be done to help mitigate challenges like over communicating, keeping things open ended. But, overall, yeah, just keep doing your best. We can't put our life on hold because of retrogrades. That is for certain. I think that is all I have to say about for Libra Rising. So, Scorpio Rising, this is going to be all this Venus weather is going to be happening in your fifth and sixth houses. And so, Venus being relationships, love, beauty, fun, Venus being what is fair, ethical, our values, Venus being our preferences. All of those lenses are brought out as it relates to your daily life, your daily chores, your care of yourself, the way that you take care of pets or loved ones, the sixth house of labor, going to the office space. Venus is asking, what do you value about these things, about these activities, these processes? What do you value about your chores? Do your chores reflect your values? Uh, does your labor space reflect your values? Uh, does the way that you take care of your health reflect your values? Like, that is the Venus questionnaire for the sixth house. When it comes to your pets, say you value, um, you know, being really good to animals and being really humane to animals, then does, Fido's dog food reflect that value? So Venus can be that lens in that area of life. And then also the fifth house of fun, rest, children, sex, self-expression, creativity, gifts. Venus is going to be spending a lot of time in Pisces as well the first half of 2025. So, as much as Venus can be asking preferences in the sixth house around labor, what do you prefer around your labor life? Do you prefer to make your own schedule? In the fifth, what do you prefer around rest? In the sixth, what do you prefer in your health routines? In the fifth, what do you prefer around your hobbies? So we can ask this question about preferences. What do you prefer in your romantic love life, in your sex life? Venus can be so helpful in helping bring us back to the things that we value, the things that we prefer in certain areas of life. In your parenting, how you parent. Venus helping to remind you what you value about that, in that, how your values are imbued in your parenting, what your preferences are in parenting. All of that might be, first half of the year might be a good time to be reminded of all of those ways of being that might feel the most supportive for you in your fifth house of parents, children, sex, or not parents, parenting. Um, Creative place, the fifth. It's a creative place, a place of self expression, creative process. When Venus is in there, especially now in January, again in April, Venus is very juicy in Pisces. So whenever Venus is in Pisces, even if it's like projects that you can't get off the ground right now, just write them down anyway. You've got a little creative genius in your fifth house, quite a bit in the first half of 2025. And then Venus is going to be going into the sixth saying, how do we bring this creative stuff to life in a regular way? How do I work this into my routine? How do I bring this art? What is the labor that is involved in it? All of those questions and weaving together these areas of life. So the first half of 2025 could be really fruitful when it comes to art projects, creative projects, anything where you are generating something. I think about my brother who's a farmer and he's always building something, building a shed, building this, building that. That is fifth house creativity in action. And so, the first half of the year, letting these processes kind of wide open, leave them be experimental, you know, uh, let them be not set in stone until mid-April. So anything you're working on early in 2025, let yourself be winding with it, let yourself be, trying different things, and then know that things will settle and take more shape end of April if you need that to happen. Um, when it comes to children, Venus is sprinkling their little fairy dust upon the fifth house of children. So this might be a time of really just enjoying time with your kids, doing really fun, yummy things together, um, really enjoying Venus being luxury as much as possible when they're in this place. If you have a partner going on date night, and same thing, do fun stuff, do yummy things. That's what Venus in Pisces does really well. So enjoy that the first half of the year. Even in the sixth, when Venus is in the sixth, how can we enjoy the chores? How can we whistle while we work? Can Brenda from accounting bring muffins in? That would be great for Venus in the sixth. So, how can we enjoy in the little ways our daily life as well? So, dating wise, I should say, being this is fifth house, if you are dating and Venus is retrograde in your fifth, it's not a deal breaker. But if it does make you nervous or if there seems like there's a lot of uncertainty, let things be open ended until mid April. Saturn is in your fifth as well, making things a little bit slower, a little bit more serious. There's always these questions of long term with Saturn, and they've been there since March 2023, so this isn't super new. But these questions of what relationships or here sexual partners, what of this is uh, long term, if it's long term. What if this is sustainable? And so Saturn kind of demands that things have healthy boundaries, that there is some level of self respect here. And so, I'm not worried when Venus is retrograde in Pisces. I'm not worried about any old riffraff coming in here and causing you problems because Saturn is here kind of keeping things on the level. But yeah, if Venus is retrograde in your fifth and you don't have that in your birth chart, like if you have Venus retrograde in your birth chart, you're gonna be fine. But if you don't, yeah, you might want to put it on the maybe pile, the let's wait and see until mid-April. So not a deal breaker, but some caveats. And that's for Scorpio rising. Good luck. Okay, Sagittarius rising. Venus is going to be spending a lot of time the first half of 2025 in your fifth and fourth houses. Now, I'm going to say right out of the gate that Venus retrograde in your fifth house is not a deal breaker for dating. It's going to be they're going to be retrograde all of March, first half of April. If you meet someone really cool in that period of time, don't fret. I would say over communicate, make sure they're over communicating, no expectations, only possibilities. And, worst case, just keep things open ended until mid April. Um, Neptune is here. That's why I'm saying over communicate. That's why I'm saying no expectations, only possibilities. So Venus is also going to be affecting not only topics of romance, but if you are in a partnership already, Venus in the fifth can be really great for date night, really great for having a good time, having fun. If you have children, same thing. Venus can really help with having fun, having a good time, enjoying life, all the pleasures and delights of existing. That's Venus. It's gift giving, it's adornments, it's all that fun stuff. So enjoy Venus being in your fifth. That's going to be more February, March. And it can help also to remind what we value about these topics in life, what we value in terms of rest or fun, what we value in terms of parenting or our children. Um, your children might just be having a good time, I guess. That can also be happening. But anyway, Venus can remind us what we value and what we enjoy, who we value, and can help us to connect. So Venus is helping us connect with children, with romantic partners, with our creativity. And so Venus in the fifth, also a great time to exercise your creativity. You don't have to be like a watercolor painter or anything like that. I think of my brother who is a farmer who's always building something. There's a lot of fifth house ways that a lot of ways the fifth house can come out. So have fun with it. And then when Venus is in your fourth, same thing when it comes to your home, having fun in your home, having fun with parents. That can be Venus in the fourth. Having fun rearranging your furniture. If you're moving, having fun getting to know your new house. So when Venus is in Pisces, more in, it's currently in January and again in April, Venus is really going to be bringing a lot of joy and hopefully fun and delight into your private life, your own home, into your relationships with your parents, ancestry as well. So Venus in Pisces in the fourth house, that's going to be a time where maybe we're noticing some of that sweetness in terms of not only parents, but grandparents and everyone before them. So, this is actually a great time when Venus is in Pisces to connect with ancestors, grandparents, as well as parents in any kind of way, shape, or form. So, with Venus, a lot of times it's very sense oriented. So, food, recipes, smells, uh, fabric, certain clothes, any kind of physical thing, especially with Saturn here, like that could be a great thing to do, clean up the altar in January and April. Uh, Put out some nice things on the altar. That would be a beautiful thing to do with Venus and Pisces in the fourth. Venus retrograde can be a time of things coming back from the past. And so, especially in the fourth house, which can itself have to do with the past, this could be a time of memories, of learning things about the past that you didn't before. I know it's not Jupiter, but especially if it's like things about relationships or people that we know or used to know. Sometimes that can happen with retrogrades, just things coming out from the past or back from the past. In the fourth house, people from your past, potentially. So it could be that person that is from your hometown reaching out to you or something. Um, Same with the fifth, could be that deuterang or whoever orang coming back, can be finding fun things, old clothes, old recipes, anything from the past that was fun or preferable. So it doesn't have to be all bad. But yeah, definitely letting yourself be open-ended with topics of home, family, parents, romance, fun, children, all of those fourth and fifth house topics we want to be open-ended with. Let experiments happen, let things be wrong, and then rework them, especially in March and April of 2025. All right. I think that's mostly what I have to say for Sagittarius rising. Let's talk about Capricorn rising. So, Venus will be spending time in your fourth and third houses for the first part of 2025, first half of 2025. So, Venus bringing topics of relationships, beauty, art, fun, delights, adornments. Venus, a planet of values and ethics, our preferences. That all of those lenses coming out and then looking at the third house of siblings, extended relatives, neighborhoods. And so Venus, for instance, asking, what do I value about my neighborhood? What do I value about these third house people? Helping to remind us what we do love about those people, places, and things that are so familiar. Helping us enjoy and connect with familiar people, places, things, especially now in January and again in April of 2025 and May. So Venus is going to help us connect as well with extended relatives, cousins, aunts, uncles, pretty much everyone who's not your parents. Venus can help us to get our values aligned in these areas of life. So when it comes to your communities, neighborhoods, how does that reflect what you value? You know, if you value nature, are you living near it, for instance? Um, Not always possible, but it can help to at least, sadly, sometimes Venus comes through and it's like, yeah, I value nature, but I cannot afford to live near it. And it can be that painful recognition of, yeah, these are my values, and I am not seeing them reflected around me. Um, that's a real possibility too. So, and this too. And then Saturn is here. So that is one reason why it's reasonable to go into a difficult direction with values. And also Venus being in Aries can sometimes be having to deal with um, conflict over values. And it doesn't have to be that, but I also don't want to dismiss that if people are noticing, hey, this Venus transit is going across all of my family stuff. Why isn't it just, pure harmony during this time? And Venus can really help us to grow and cultivate harmony wherever they are. So I will say the first half of 2025, I mean, the garden is right there for cultivation with family for all the Capricorn risings out there. But Venus might also be bumping up against certain differences in values potentially with folks. And at least in the United States, I am absolutely thinking about the change in the administration right now. So I'm not going to pretend like that's not in the back of my mind. As people are going home and sometimes being around relatives that have really different views, and some people are, very holding their views lightly. Other people hold on to their views really strongly. And there might just be a lot of conversation about values around you. There might be a lot, a lot of that around. So, do your best, take care of yourself, do what you need to do to get through all of that. And try to lean into Venus being an agent of connection with these people, places, and things that are so familiar, so close to home. Um, Venus is also preferences. And so when it comes to communication, how would you like to be communicated with? How would you like to communicate? Saturn being there in your third, helping you make really healthy boundaries about that. So that can be a really fruitful thing to do here. And amongst the ideas about healthy boundaries and how might want to be communicated with, a Venus retrograde specifically is a good time to try things, to do things differently, to experiment. And so if you are trying new ways of connecting with family, with extended relatives, trying new ways of communicating, during especially March and April of 2025. That would fit very, very well with the retrograde. So it's not a deal breaker for communication, for connecting with people when Venus is retrograde, especially if you have it in your birth chart. But if you are concerned about it, of course, over communicate. Um, think only, only possibilities, no expectations, only possibilities, because Neptune, who is a little expectation machine, and then Saturn, who likes to have a rubric, there's a lot of expectations around potentially. So making sure that everyone's on the same page with those things, that can be a really helpful way to help Venus navigate being around Neptune in the first half of 2025. And one last thought for Capricorn rising, Venus in the third could be, finding fun, delight in learning new things, enjoying learning new things, uh, taking advantage of short distance travel. So, having fun doing short distance travel. And Venus can also point to our preferences. So, in terms of short distance travel, what are your preferences? How might you like to enjoy that the best? What might make you the most comfortable, supported in those third house endeavors? And also, when it comes to that learning new things, preferences. Do you prefer to learn alone? Do you prefer to learn in a group? Do you prefer to have visual aids or audio listening? What are your preferences around foundational learning? That could also be a really fruitful area of inquiry while Venus is in Pisces for you in the first half of 2025 if you are a Capricorn rising. So, good luck, Capricorn rising. I wish you the best. And let's move our attention to Aquarius rising. Venus has been and will continue to be in your second and third houses. So the second house of money, resourcing, anything that supports you in your life. That can be your money, your time, your energy, your effort, anything you can sell on Craigslist, any kind of liquid asset. That's all the second house. Skills, talents, even. And Venus will also be in the third house of siblings, extended relatives, cousins, aunts, uncles, in laws, neighbors, neighborhoods, familiar people, places, things, foundational learning and teaching, communication, short distance travel, also divination. So, with these topics, there's a lot of them in the third house. There's very many topics, so I apologize for that. But that's what could be activated by Venus here. So, Venus shining that light of what are my preferences when it comes to how I manage my money? What are my values when it comes to money? So, it might be, and with the third paired with that, communication about money, communication with familiar people, with siblings, with cousins, aunts, neighbors about resourcing and money. All of that could be going on in the first half of 2025. Venus reminding us what our preferences and values are around money and communication, or what are our preferences around these relationships with these familiar people or relatives. Um, sometimes that goes very well. We can have Venus helping us to connect with people and we can be having a good time. So, especially in like March, um, April, sorry, no, that's February, March. Venus is going to be in Aries. You might be having a great time with your neighbors, familiar people, people you see regularly. You might be having a really nice time with siblings, cousins, aunts, uncles, etc. So Venus can bring a lot of fun and joy and delight to a place. So don't sleep on that. At the same time, or in addition, uh, Venus, especially in Aries, can be a challenge to our values. Feeling like we don't quite belong or that we're a bit of an outsider in terms of values or presentation, with Aries being a place that Venus is not familiar with and that is not familiar with Venus. So if there is some of that discomfort or challenge there, hang in there. It's not forever. I would say that Venus helps to smooth over so much. They are charming, they're diplomatic. And so having this diplomatic person in your third house for quite a while in the first half of 2025, that's going to be of service. I think that's going to be helpful. Venus retrograde really speaks to a redoing, a revision, a reconsideration of Venus things in this case, a polishing, a refining. So, really doing those things with third house people, places, things. So, reconsidering neighborhoods, reconsidering how our relationships are going with third house people. Are they going how I like? Is there any kind of healthy boundaries that need to be made anywhere? Um, is this aligning with my values in terms of what I'm surrounded by at any given moment? So, Venus is going to be helping us do that and really reworking it, reorganizing it in the first half of the year. Reorganizing maybe where you're spending your time, your attention, your money in the first half of the year. So letting that process be open-ended, not saying, in March, setting in stone, this is exactly how I'm going to do my money, or this is exactly how I'm going to communicate from now on. Letting those be evolving processes that are going to take us really through the first half of 2025. When it comes to making commitments around money, commitments with third house, people, places, things. Keep it open-ended as much as possible in March and into April. So March 1st to April 12th, the retrograde period, Venus might be reworking or revisiting things. And so letting that be open-ended. And then so that way we can get a little less frustrated if we need to go back, circle around, et cetera, et cetera. Saturn is around. So there is this question of long game, of sustainability, of what is the long-term plan here. And so Venus is going to be faced with a lot of larger questions like that as well in the first half of 2025. So she's going to be deciding where do I want to invest my resources? How would I like to get resources? And is that, income aligned with what I need, with preferences I have? Is that income aligned with my values? You know, all of us are going to have different capacities and our ability to align with these things, to have agency, to work toward, living our best life essentially. And so again, I think Venus can help just keep us focused, keep us aware and tethered to what we value so that that can help be a guiding force. And it's not always fun because we can look around and it can be upsetting to see that things aren't how I would like them to be. And this is not me living my best life. But even acknowledging that and then saying, okay, but I do know what would be my best life. I think it's important to hold on to that. And Venus helps us hold on to that. So that's it for Aquarius rising. Thank you. Good luck with all of that. Let's see about Pisces rising. So this transit of Venus is going to be moving through your first and second houses of self and resourcing. So we can expand these out a little bit more. The first house being about mind, spirit, so the intangible parts of you, as well as the very physical body parts of you. The second house being everything that supports that. So your money, your time, your energy, your skills, anything that is yours is the second house. So Venus is going to be moving through here with their lens about, what is valuable, what do I prefer. Venus's relationships, love, delights and pleasures, what we enjoy, what we value and prefer. Venus's ethics and justice. And so they're going to be putting all of those topics into these areas of self and resourcing. So where would I prefer to put my money? Venus might ask in the second house. What would I prefer to spend my money on? They might be wanting to spend a little bit with Venus in here. Venus is desire. So, knowing that, make sure that you're not, overdoing it here. I'm not so worried about Venus being with Saturn, Venus being in Pisces. But when we see Venus getting into the second house, they're going to have to contend with Neptune when they get in there. And so the first few days, really, of Venus being in Aries, they're a little bit compromised. So I guess, knowing that, and you can go before in the timestamps. So especially for Pisces rising, when Venus is with Neptune. So it's like the first part of February and then April. Venus is going to be with Neptune in your second house of money and resources. And so that could be a recipe for spending on something that that there's confusion, there's a lack of information, a lack of clarity. So I would say, early February and April, read the fine print, be extra careful about what you're purchasing, and know that, in March and April as well, you might be returning things. So just be careful about that. Don't beat yourself up if there's some things that happen there. Um, Otherwise, I mean, Venus in the second, yeah, really lean into what are your preferences here with money, how you're managing it, how you're spending it, and then values in terms of is my money, my energy, my time going into things that I value? Because sometimes we can get wrapped up with things other people value. And so, if there's any kind of reconsideration or thinking, especially in collaboration with others, relationships with others, um, is this fair? Is this sustainable? Am I pouring myself into things that I care about? That might be another really profitable line of questioning for Venus being in the first and the second. Venus is a great time to remember what we enjoy, remember what we value, especially a retrograde when things are coming back from the past. So, Venus in the first house of self, remembering what you like about yourself, remembering what's valuable about you, remembering what's cute about you. That's always a nice thing to do when Venus is in the first house. This is when you get the take the selfie, get your headshots done. Um, you know, treat yourself. Take care of yourself. Enjoy the yum yums in your general life. That can be a nice Venus in the first house, especially Venus in Pisces. It can be a very nice thing to do. You might be very extra charming while Venus is in Pisces in the first half of 2025. Uh, so don't be afraid to lean into what is fun as long as, you're reading the fine print, not getting carried away with a fantasy or a desire that's going to lead to suffering down the road. There's not, I would say, a deal breaker here in terms of dating. If you're worried about Venus retrograde and dating and meeting new people, especially with it being in just your general first house of self, it's not a deal breaker, especially if you have Venus retrograde in your birth chart. I'm not worried about you. But, again, over communicate with people, say only possibilities, no expectations. Make sure that you and the other people are on the same page with expectations and that is not a place where people are running wild. And then if you're concerned about the Venus retrograde and dating, you can always keep it open-ended in March and the first couple weeks of April. So it's 6 weeks approximately. And there's always an ability to slow down, keep it on the maybe pile until further notice. And then once we get into end of April into May, Venus is going to get away from Neptune. And that idea of relationship is going to be a lot starker and clearer. So, not a deal breaker, but take your time. There is fog on the road here a little bit, so making sure that you're not moving too fast through it. Last notes being Venus is going to be retrograde, and retrogrades can often be doing things differently, experimenting, having challenges and disruptions and delays. I would say when it does come to topics of self, how you take care of yourself, your health, um, topics of your appearance, whether that's wardrobe, haircut, makeup, anything like that. Be open-ended about it. Let yourself experiment, try different things, do things differently. Know that if there's some hiccups along the way, that's okay. And then in your second house, similarly with how you're managing your money, what you're spending money on, know that there might be some snafus, some delays, some returns. Um, and then also to lean into doing things differently there, especially in March and April, trying different ways of managing money or spending money or different ways of managing your resources. Spending your time differently, spending your energy differently during March and April. That is totally in line with a retrograde. All right, best of luck, Pisces Rising.